At the beginning of World War II, Romania was neutral. When Poland was attacked, Romania opened its border so that the Polish treasury and government could be evacuated towards Egypt, which was then ruled by Britain. Romania would maintain this policy throughout the war, and it was the only country under Hitler's domination that allowed the European Jews to enter and leave. Hundreds of thousands of Jews escaped Hitler's Europe and left towards Palestine or the West through Romania this way. As mentioned in the previous episode, Romania was ruled by the German playboy King Charles II, who betrayed Romania numerous times, like his father before him. For example, in 1928, after first abandoning the throne to travel around the world, he made a deal with Hungary under which he promised to cede some territories of Romania in exchange for the Hungarians helping him get back on the throne of Romania. He became a dictator in 1938, and in order to appease Hitler he passed some anti-Jewish laws similar to those in Nazi Germany. Like we have shown in the previous episode, he accepted the territorial ruptures and the carving of Romania into 4 pieces as agreed on by Hitler and Stalin under the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. 2 genocides were immediately started by the Judeo-Bolsheviks of USSR in Bessarabia and Bukovina and by the Hungarians in Transylvania. Charles II was thus hated by everyone and was forced to leave Romania forever by Marshal Antonescu. Oil is the blood of an army, and without it, a war is lost before it starts. The only sources of oil which Hitler had at his disposal were the Russian and the Romanian oil fields. In a recording done by the National Radio on June 6, 1942 and recently released to the public in Finland, Hitler explains to Finn Army leader Gustav Mannerheim that he knew about the USSR's intentions of attacking Europe, as described in the previous episode, and therefore the oil of Romania was a top priority for him since the beginning. He also expressed fears that the Soviets would try and occupy the Romanian oil fields before him. After the war, German Marshal Erich von Manstein also wrote in his memoirs that the reason why the Romanian and German armies attacked Crimea was because of the huge Soviet air bases which threatened the Romanian oil fields. Indeed, Hitler was obsessed by oil. He made numerous attempts at conquering or recovering lost oil fields, such as in the Caucasus in 1942, in Transylvania in 1944 and again in Hungary in 1945. The catastrophe of the German and Romanian armies in Crimea was due to Hitler's wish to keep the Romanian oil fields out of the reach of Allied aviation. The same reason was behind his attempts at keeping control over the Balkans. For this reason, after first forcefully carving Romania into pieces to weaken it, Hitler flooded Romania from north to south with German troops which were ready to intervene in case of Romanian non-compliance. For the same reason he also created a large Nazi movement of the German ethnics living in Romania, led by the Transylvanian German ethnic Andreas Schmidt. The one who allowed the German army to occupy Romania was Marshal Antonescu, which obtained promises from Hitler that Romania will be unified again after the war. Without this action, Hitler would have probably invaded Romania by force, which would have had far worse consequences for Romania. From the beginning, Antonescu made it clear to Hitler that the goals of Romania were not the German or the Soviet cause, but a territorial reunification of the Romanian lands which were occupied by Hitler and Stalin. As we have shown in past episodes, in Transylvania the Hungarians started an ethnic cleansing genocidal campaign which rivaled in barbarism with the Judeo-Bolshevik genocides going on in the occupied Romanian territories to the east. Moreover, 70,000 Romanian civilians were used as slave labor by the Hungarian army on the Eastern Front. As such, throughout the war over 500,000 soldiers, the majority of the Romanian army, stayed in Romania, ready to enter the occupied part of Transylvania and did not take part in the eastern campaigns. On the 26th of November 1940, when Romania entered an alliance with Hitler, Antonescu said to him, quote, "Romania will never accept the situation which was forced on it. When the time comes, We will reclaim all of our rights. Antonska repeated this threat numerous times during the war and said that at the first opportunity Romania will reject Hitler's territorial raptures and re-enter occupied Transylvania. Antonska's decision to accept the German territorial aggression and ally himself with Hitler was made easier by the fact that an even bigger threat came from the USSR. As we have shown in the previous episode, Stalin was going to start a war on Europe and Bolshevize the entire continent whether or not the Europeans attacked him first. As such, a Romanian war against the USSR was inevitable. After first occupying Bessarabia and Bukovina, the USSR flooded this region with armies ready to invade. All throughout the western border Stalin had amassed over 3 million soldiers, 15,000 tanks, 10,000 planes, etc. Stalin knew that without Romanian oil the German army would collapse in days, so in 1941 he was ready to invade Romania and Bolshevize it. After the initial invasion of Bessarabia led by Soviet General Zhukov, 3 more Russian armies were sent there, the 5th, 9th, and 12th armies. He was also pushing Hungary and Bulgaria to demand even more territories from Romania. Simultaneously, Soviet airplanes and Jewish communist traitors in Romania were spreading leaflets and doing propaganda for Bolshevism. Armed resistance against both Stalin and Hitler was clearly impossible and Romania would have probably been wiped off the map. Also, Hungary and Bulgaria always hated Romania and wanted to occupy Romanian territories. Romania was surrounded from all sides by enemies. The only neighbor which did not openly declare its intention of attacking Romania was Yugoslavia. Also, after seeing how the Bolsheviks manipulating France and Britain deceived Poland and tricked it just to start a war and then abandoned it to Hitler and the Eastern Bolsheviks, it was clear that the West could not be trusted and no support would come from there. This is why Antonska was forced to make a choice between Germany and the USSR and ally himself with one of them, even though they both attacked Romania. But of these two, it was the USSR which could not be dealt with by reason and negotiations. As shown in the past few episodes, it was clear to all European leaders and intellectuals that the USSR was run by Jews which did not care about the Russian army and would continue to attempt the Bolshevization of Europe until they were stopped. As such, Antonska made it clear from the beginning that Romania would not abandon the Eastern Front until the Bolshevik threat was completely neutralized. Antonska was also influenced by Hitler's promises to send military equipment to Romania, which had outdated technology. Of course, Hitler lied and used Romanian soldiers as pawns in his master plan, and hundreds of thousands would be sacrificed. In June 1941 Romanian forces attacked the huge Bolshevik armies which occupied Bessarabia and Bukovina. In just 1 month they would manage to defeat and chase away the Bolsheviks. Then as now, the authorities in Russia described the liberation of these Romanian lands as an act of quote-unquote, aggression of Romania and an invasion of Soviet territory. Like everywhere on the western border of the USSR, the Bolshevik army was ready for the invasion of Europe, and the lack of defensive positions explains the quick advance and victory of the Romanian armies. At Hitler's request, the Romanian army advanced into Ukraine where the Germans and Romanians were welcomed as liberators. After extremely bloody battles, the Romanian army defeated the Bolsheviks, conquered the strategic port of Odessa and secured Transnistria and with it the security of the Romanian oil fields. Because the Germans failed to respect their promises and help the Romanian army with modern equipment, the typical bravery of the Romanian peasant was the only advantage the Romanian army had over the Russians. Simultaneously, A different Romanian army corps was advancing into Russia together with the Germans and Italians. Operation Barbarossa was an unexpected success at first, and the best of the Russian army, the gigantic force stationed at Europe's eastern border, was annihilated. Soon the Germans reached Moscow. Only God knows why Hitler decided to stop the advance at that moment and did not attempt to conquer the capital and end the war. At this point Stalin was desperate. Whereas in May 1941, after building the largest and most modern army of the world as shown in the previous episode, he was sure of a complete conquest and Bolshevization of Europe, a year later the German troops were just a few miles from his office. He began a desperate mobilization of every resource available and with the help of America rebuilt his army and recruited tens of millions of Russians. This second army of Stalin was poorly prepared and managed and would lead to the deaths of over 20 million Russians. Looking at the number of casualties, we can see that 20 Russians died for every German, Romanian or Italian soldier. Veterans of the Stalingrad battle, for example, would later recount how the Russians were herded into battle like cattle to the slaughter, with only the front line having weapons and the rest picking up the weapon when the front man died. Most times they would get drunk before the battle since they were facing certain death, not being allowed to retreat either.
But Stalin also knew that these troops might not stay and fight. Many of the Red Army had turned and retreated in the face of the German blitzkrieg that summer. Now, Stalin determined, his soldiers would be made to hold their ground. Just behind the front line, he ordered blocking detachments to assemble. They had one simple task. If Red Army soldiers ran past them, then they were to shoot them dead.
Вот там свой род сразу раз останавливали, жизнь отдавай, но не отступая, сражайся. А если не сопротивляешься или еще все-таки бежит или что, уничтожали. Стой, стрелять будут. Или вверх даешь стрелять. Нет, все на месте уничтожали.
The defeat at Stalingrad rests on the shoulders of the German commander Maximilian von Weizsäcker. He was the one who allowed the Russians to encircle his armies. In the days prior to the start of the Russian offensive, the Romanian commanders of the armies where the Russians would attack, repeatedly warned Maximilian von Weizsäcker of the fact that a huge offensive was being prepared, but he failed to react. As such, the huge Russian hordes had no problem defeating the Romanian army, which was the weak spot because of its outdated equipment and numeric inferiority. Furthermore, when the enormous size of the Russian offensive became clear and the Romanians warned him that a retreat was the only option, Maximilian von Weizsäcker ordered a fight to the last man instead, probably under the influence of Hitler's orders. As a result, 300,000 German and Romanian troops were trapped in an encirclement. Desperate efforts were made by the Romanian generals to help the trapped soldiers escape the encirclement, with some even proposing disobeying the orders of Maximilian von Weizsäcker. But since Antonescu initially ordered them to respect the German orders, the fate of these soldiers was sealed. They followed the German orders and fought to the death. When realizing the situation, Antonescu convinced Hitler to allow the Romanian army to retreat, but by then it was too late. Since captivity in the Bolshevik gulags of the USSR meant certain death, a group of about 30,000 Romanian soldiers led by General Lasker attempted to force a breakthrough of the Russian encirclement, but they suffered heavy losses and only 3,000 of them succeeded in escaping the encirclement. The defeat at Stalingrad was decisive not because of the human and material losses, but because it permanently demoralized the German and Romanian soldiers who became convinced that the war was lost at that point. The best German field commander of World War II, Erich von Manstein, in his book appropriately named Lost Victories, would write about the Romanian soldiers, quote, "In spite of the shortcomings, the Romanians did their duty as best as they could. Above all, they always followed the German commander's orders without objection, and unlike other allies of ours, They never sacrificed military interests for personal prestige. The Romanians remained our best allies, and in many situations they showed extraordinary courage." End quote. On the 12th of May 1943, since it was clear to him that the USSR would invade Germany, Marshal Antonescu allowed about 50,000 German ethnics that were enrolled in the Romanian army to leave and join the German army. If today we still have some degree of freedom and are able to talk about these things, this is due to the millions of people who saw past the propaganda and understood the evil of Bolshevism and left everything behind and sacrificed their lives in the most noble fight in history, that between humanity and Bolshevism. These were the best of the best that humanity had to offer, people from all races, all religions, all nationalities, all backgrounds and all continents joined hands. Germans, Italians, Romanians, Hungarians, Bulgarians, Croats, French, British, Belgians, Dutch, Russians, Ukrainians, Polish, Spanish, Americans, Japanese, Indians, Arabs, Bosnians, Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, and a long list of other nationalities from all over the world, Hindus, Christians, Jewish, atheists, Muslims, Buddhists and all sorts of religions, white people, East Asians, blacks, South Asians, Mongoloids, Hispanics, and all kinds of races. They all gave everything up and preferred death rather than let Bolshevism take over the world. Never forget. In November 1942, after a meeting with Hitler, Antonescu said, quote, "Germany lost the war, we now have to focus on not losing ours." He would later start a series of negotiations with the Allies in order to secure a good armistice for Romania. In 1943 he started secret negotiations with the Americans and the British. At negotiations in Cairo they asked Romania to surrender unconditionally, but Antonescu and the political parties of Romania refused an unconditional surrender. The Romanian party made it clear to the Allies that a surrender would have serious repercussions for Romania since the German army occupied it and a control of the resources of Romania were essential for Hitler. The Americans, such as State Secretary Cordell Hull and the army, were all in favor of signing the armistice that Antonescu wanted, except for President Roosevelt, who had other plans for Romania and insisted on an unconditional surrender and was not in favor of Romania becoming an ally with full rights. Simultaneously, negotiations with the Soviets were being completed in 1944 in Stockholm, which guaranteed the independence, territorial integrity, and neutrality of Romania with the condition that Romania permanently gave up the territories occupied by the Russians in 1940. The German army was to be given a 15 days time frame to orderly evacuate Romania. At that point the Russians were getting desperate since in the west the Americans were advancing, and if Romania did not exit the war the Russians could not have reached Germany before the Allies. As mentioned before, the majority of the Romanian army stayed in Romania during the war, and Antonescu had enough resources to stop the advance of the Russians long enough for the Americans to reach Germany, Hungary and then Romania. So at that point the Allies had two options. Either sign an armistice with Romania, thus allowing the Russians a swift advance towards Germany, or refuse the armistice and thus give the Americans the opportunity to occupy entire Europe. As expected, the Americans did not agree to the armistice, but the Russians desperately needed it in order to occupy as much European territory as possible before the end of the war. So on the 23rd of August 1944 the armistice between Romania and the USSR was ready to be signed, and the only one who needed to be informed was the King Michael of the German family that occupied the throne. But like his father and grandfather before him, he too would betray Romania on that fatidic day. The 23rd of August 1944 is the darkest day in Romanian history and marks the day when the Romanian nation was sentenced to spiritual and intellectual death and slavery under Bolshevik masters until today. The 23rd of August 1944 was the day when Antonescu and the leaders of the main Romanian political parties decided to sign the armistice with the USSR and were going to inform the king. The king's private secretary Mircea Ionescu later wrote that on that morning he was awakened by the deputy prime minister Mihai Antonescu, not related to Marshal Antonescu, who phoned him asking that the king received Marshal Antonescu in an audience later that day. In the Curie Rule newspaper of 13 October 1944, General Aurel Aldea, one of the traitors that helped the king, confirms that Antonescu was going to see the king that day and sign the armistice, and also confessed that they were planning to overthrow Antonescu on the 26th of August. So they decided to arrest him on that day instead. At the phony Bolshevik trial of Marshal Antonescu in 1946, Gheorghe Breșanu, a leading politician, also confirmed that Antonescu was going to sign the armistice on that day. The American envoy to Moscow Averell Harriman would also confirm this later. Together with the king's allies, the Communist Party represented by Lucretia Patrascanu was also involved. By that time the Bolshevik Jews of Romania led by Anna Porca succeeded in recruiting a small group of Romanian communists which joined the Bolshevik Jews and formed the Communist Party of Romania. As for the motives behind the king's betrayal, his private secretary Mircea Ionescu wrote that he was displeased with Antonescu because the marshal treated him like an incompetent child and was patronizing him. The king told the politician Gheorghe Breșanu that, quote, "If I let Antonescu sign the armistice himself, he will continue to patronize us." Basically the king wanted to continue to live his extravagant lifestyle. When Antonescu came to the king's palace to discuss the armistice as agreed, he was arrested by the traitor king and 5 other accomplices. The king then issued a radio proclamation to the country, in which he basically lied to the Romanian people and told them that an armistice was signed guaranteeing the independence and suzerainty of Romania. This was of course a blatant lie, and the king did not sign any armistice. He simply ordered the army to lay down the weapons and welcome the Bolsheviks. He would only sign an armistice on the 12th of September. Between the 23rd of August and the 12th of September the Romanian army was forbidden from fighting, but the Russians still considered Romania an enemy and occupied the country. As a result of the treason of King Michael, over 150,000 Romanian soldiers were taken prisoners during this period and they were all sent to the gulags. Many others were simply killed on the spot. Since Romania was left without any defense by the treason of the king, the Bolsheviks were free to pillage and rob Romania. Like in 1919 when the Bolsheviks stole the entire Romanian treasury, they tried again to steal, but this time it was hidden in a monastery, and even though they were tortured, those that knew where it was did not reveal the secret and the Russians could not find it. None of the points negotiated by Antonescu were found in the armistice signed by the traitor king, and Romania ended up under Bolshevik domination. The king's quote-unquote armistice was basically what both the Western and Eastern Bolsheviks wanted, an unconditional surrender. Moreover, at the Peace Treaty of Paris in 1946 Romania was considered an aggressor country as a result of the King Michael's treason, and was forced to sign a peace treaty which imposed economic burdens heavier than the ones Germany had after World War I. The king's treason shocked the Romanian soldiers and commanders. Ion Manuel, one of the greatest Romanian soldiers in World War II who would continue the fight in the German army until the end of the war, wrote in his diary on August 24, 1944, quote, "The marshal replaced, the king betrays, the army is rebelling, a communist government, etc. I don't understand anything anymore." End quote. General Platon Chernoga would later write, quote, "We have here a king that abandons his army to the enemy. Where in the world can we find a similar leader?" On July 20, 1945 he was awarded Stalin's Order of the Soviet Victory. It's a sad honor to be awarded by the mortal enemy of your own people. End quote. As always, The Russian troops started looting Romania, raping women and abusing civilians, and in Bessarabia and Bukovina the assassinations, deportations and the mass starvation would start again. Women in Romanian villages were so afraid of the army of Russian rapists that young girls would hide in the fields and borrow the clothes of their grandmothers to trick the Russians. This was the typical behavior of Russian soldiers ever since they first started occupying Romanian lands 2 centuries earlier, but during World War II they exhibited the worst behavior. In Germany, for example, over 2 million women were raped, from 8 years old to 80 years old. This campaign of assassinations, pillage and rapes was partly driven by the Jewish Bolshevik propaganda minister Ilya Ehrenberg, whose sadistic writings were distributed among the Russian soldiers. For example, the leaflet entitled "Kill" contained these phrases. "The Germans are not human beings. If you have not killed at least 1 German a day, you have wasted that day. There is nothing more amusing for us than a heap of German corpses." End quotes. The Romanian army at that point was under Bolshevik control as a result of the king's treason, and was forced to fight in the west against the Germans until the end of the war, resulting in a further 21,000 Romanian casualties. Those of them that also fought on the Eastern Front would later be thrown in jail and persecuted. This pillage of Romania by the Russians, the genocides, deportations, persecutions, forced labor, destruction of Romanian culture and of its millennial ethnography, and the 50 years of communist rule and the ensuing brainwashing and dumbing down of the population were not the only results of the King Michael's treason. By taking Romania out of the war, the Eastern Front collapsed, and this shortened the war and made it easier for the Bolshevik army to reach Germany. As we have shown before, the Marshal Antonscu had enough resources to delay the Bolsheviks until Europe was occupied by the Americans. The king's treason allowed the Bolsheviks not only to destroy Romania and the Romanian people in the following 50 years, but also many other Eastern European nations who were also occupied by the Bolsheviks. Marshal Antonscu would be executed after a phony trial in 1946, along with thousands of other members of the Romanian elite, and his body was destroyed so that he would have no grave. His last words were, "Long live Romania." The traitor King Michael continued to collaborate with his Bolshevik friends for 3 more years. Thousands of Romanians retreated into the mountains after the Bolshevik invasion and fought against communists for decades. The traitor king was not one of them. On the 6th of March 1945 he signed the papers that formed a new Bolshevik government in Romania, which was a death sentence for Romanian society. He immediately organized a royal dinner where the cream of the Russian army and the Romanian and Jewish Bolsheviks were invited. Indeed, the Soviet diplomat Andrei Vyshinsky sent a telegram to Stalin on the 1st of March 1945 saying that, quote, "The king repeatedly underlined his wish of preserving the best relations with the Soviet government." All throughout the Bolshevik takeover of Romania under the leadership of the Jewish Bolshevik Hanna Porker, the traitor king never once refused to sign the laws that the Bolsheviks were asking for and which will lead to the deaths of tens of thousands of innocent Romanians, to deportations and imprisonment, torture and assassination of anyone deemed a threat to the new Bolshevik order. He also refused to pardon any of the soldiers that fought on the Eastern Front and who were imprisoned after the war. After the fake elections of 1946, he addressed the parliament on the 16th of November 1946 endorsing the result. Among others, he said, quote, "We wish to express our feelings of gratitude to the glorious Soviet Army and to its heroes, fallen in our country, for the liberation of our people and of northern Transylvania and for the liberty of all nations." For his treason, Stalin awarded King Michael with the Pobeda Order, the highest Bolshevik award. He would proudly exhibit this award at every opportunity he had. Stalin also sent him 2 airplanes as a gift. Until 1947 the traitor king and the Bolsheviks treated each other with courtesy. The Soviet General Suzaikov was the king's hunting partner, while the Soviet General Malinovsky was decorated by the king with the Romanian Michael the Brave Order for bravery. Suzaikov in exchange would supply the king with parts for his automobiles, which were his passion. Throughout this time, as we will see later, the Romanian nation was literally giving its last breath. Finally, after the Bolsheviks transformed Romania and there was no serious threat of an anti-communist rebellion, the traitor king abdicated and left the country. When asked why he abdicated, the traitor blatantly lies and says that, quote, thousands of students were held hostage by the communists. To this day, not a single quote-unquote student has confirmed this, not even under anonymity. The king left the country with a train loaded with personal belongings. The contents of that train are not known. However, a list of extremely valuable paintings of famous painters such as Rembrandt, belonging to the Romanian state, have gone missing when the king left the country. After that, throughout his stay in the West, he never did anything for the Romanian nation that was being destroyed behind. He did not even bother teaching his children the Romanian language, and when they came to Romania after the fall of communism in 1990 they could not speak Romanian. After again betraying Romania by joining other traitors in 1989 when the Declaration of Budapest was signed as described in Part 8 of this series, he came back to Romania in 1990 and started claiming all kinds of palaces, assets and riches. Today he lives from these riches and from the taxes of impoverished Romanians that have to pay him an exorbitant pension. He is today one of the richest people in Romania, but still does absolutely nothing for the Romanian nation. After the king's treason, Romanian patriots enrolled in the German army to continue the fight, or retreated into the mountains where they would continue the fight against Bolshevism for 2 more decades. As we have shown in the previous episodes, the vast majority of the post-war implementation of Bolshevism in Eastern Europe was done by communist Jews. This was the case of Romania as well, where the Jewish Ana Porca became the supreme dictator of Romania and was pulling the strings behind the Romanian puppets in the government. The country was flooded with Bolshevik Jews from Russia and Europe, which came to control everything in Romania, from the collectivization of agriculture to the persecution of the Romanian elite.
Departamentul Securității Statului a fost o instituție condusă la început de alogeni. Pintilie, Pantelei Bonarenko, era el ucrainian, era el ofițer NKVD cu multă experiență și așa mai departe. El era evreu. Gheorghe Pintilie, nume românizat, Pantelei Bonarenko, după numele lui de ucrainian, da? A fost șeful securității. Adjuntului Nikolski, Alexandru Nikolski, și el tot evreu, tot comunist de ăsta, tot din zona aceea basarabeană. Deci managementul instituției securității regimului comunist din România în anii 50 era în exclusivitate în mâna acestor alogeni.
as if the genocide committed during the 1940 to 1941 occupation of Bessarabia and Bukovina was not enough, the Judeo-Bolsheviks started another series of assassinations, deportations, political trials, ethnic cleansing and destruction of the Romanian elite, culminating with the creation of a mass starvation similar to the Ukrainian famine which killed millions during the 30s.
În 46, 47 a fost asta secete. Și de pe hectarul de pământ undeva grâu ieșea 5-600 de kilograme. Dar la stat trebuia să dăm tot, cam așa, atâta.
Moldova avea plan de furnizare a cerealelor către fondul de stat. Evident că acest plan era foarte mare. Aici, nefiind colhozuri, erau căsătorii individuale și pe ăștia peneau de 2 ori mai mult.
Am dovedit și am ascuns. Am săpat și în pământ și am pus butoi și am pus ceva pâine, pentru că îi îmblau cu niște sticuri, cum se numesc rusești, și căta unde-i părea, într-o iesle, și găsești, a strâns tot. Foamea n-avea să fie, dar ei organizată.
La noi, scopul care era? Să moară o parte din lume și poate românii să știe care se împotrivă, contra. Asta era un scop. După aceasta se poate face liber colhozurile.
Ei au luat tot de la oameni. Oamenii aveau strâns sac cu făină, că așa era la moldoveni și așa era. Aveau fasole strâns, aveau piani, dar dacă ei au venit și au măturat tot.
Tot ce aveau și rămâneau câte 7 copii, câte 8 copii și n-aveau nimic ce mânca.
Asta e ideologie comunistă, ca să faci colhoz, adică colectivizare, trebuie să-i înspăimânți pe oameni, să-i aduci la disperare. Și ca să zică ei singuri, primește-mă în colectivul vostru numai să nu mor. Și așa și-au făcut, când au văzut că cad ca găinile toți, ceilalți de spaimă, sigur că s-au cerut să-i primească în colectivul lor. Adăugător. Păi nu mai am adăugător, iată am copii, n-am de unde. Ai.
Noi am dovedit și am ascuns vreo 400 de kilograme, vreo 300 de kilograme de grâu. Și cu aceea am ieșit. Dar de acum tata se umflase de foame. Că știți că orice părinte, întâi și întâi, copilul și statul.
Ceea ce care au avut pierzi uscate, mere uscate, trăgeau la râșniță, știți ce înseamnă râșniță? Două pietre așa, dar se măcinau și asta. În afară de asta, coarja de copac. Știți, au rămas mulți copaci care scoteau coarja de copac și măcinau.
Oamenii început să se mai ascundă câte ceva. Căutau și în sobe. Și prin pământ, așa, unde vedea, prin grădină, prin stogurile cu paie, căuta până când nu găseau. Totuși luau absolut până la ultimul grăunte. Și dacă găseau ceva ascuns undeva, care omul punea pentru copii, poate ceva, îl judeca. Că el o ascuns de stat și îl judeca la 10 ani, la 15 ani de zile, că nu a dat statului impozitul.
Îi spuneți, nu umblați voi copiilor la cuibare, că trebuie să ducem ouăle, că altfel ghisoarea, Sibiria.
Nu toate erau. Nu toți aveau lână, nu toți aveau ouă câți. Oamenii zi și noapte activă ca șârchii, ca fiarele sălbatice scuturau podurile la oameni.
Dacă vedea că nu găsește, îmbla cu o suliță așa mare și unde potriveau ei, că o ascuns omul, găsea acolo și îl luau la Sovietul Sătesc și își băteau joc acolo, îl băteau și îl speriau în tot felul și la închisoare îl trimiteau.
Și, într-adevăr, era o mascaradă, că se filmau de cronică documentară, când ăștia aduc carele cu grâul la gara să le scarte în fondul de stat, iar dincolo de aceasta era o genocid.
Care nu dovedit să ascunde, așa s-au dus mulți. În satele cele nu prea au ascuns oamenii. Apoi au vândut oamenii, descopereau casele, scoteau ușile, geamurile și le ducea prin alte sate unde mai rămânea câte aleacă. Câte o puțin așa și n-auzeai nici câini în sat.
Oamenii au împânzit tot teritoriul Basarabiei îmblând după o bucățică de pâine, după o fărâmă de măligă, după ceva de mâncare. Aduceau de vândut icoane, aduceau de vândut prosoape, covoare, lucruri din aur, ce vreți. Valuta de schimb era pâinea.
O pâine era un covor. Dacă aveai să... Dacă mai aveai covorul și ăla.
Pâinea. La gară o duceau cu căruțele, era descarcată sub cerul liber, nu aveau depozite, ploua, mucize, să fie luată de la țăran. Să fie luată, ca țăranul să rămâie lipit pământului și atunci el poate fi manipulat cum le place.
Ce mâncam? Mâncam buruiene, tot ce era, făină de cioclej, știri, lobodă și lumea de acum a început să mănânce aia asta, ierburile astea. Și coieste au scăpat. Și zice, mămica torcea bine, știți cum pe atunci știe să țesă, să stăia și zice, boarfele nu ne încălze. Am să vând tot, dar numai să scăpăm.
Recolta fiind mică, animalele au fost sacrificate și deja în 47 iarna s-a început o foame cumplită legată cu act de canibalism.
Da. Vașele le țineau în casă lumea. Oaiul pierit și el s-a temut Da, era bolnavă. S-a temut și a zis că faci sopon din... O fierbe pe semne că său culegi din trânsa, că eu nu știu chestia, tehnologia asta de a face sopon. Și au mirosit unul altul și au venit, iată asta nu mă țin minte, că veneau în izmene, albe, fără cămașă, de nu mai aveau nimic pe dânsă, tot o dat pe mâncare. Au schimbat pe bucată de pâine, pe o cartofă și vine izmene și... Nicolai, dă-mi, te rog, o bucată de carne, dar poperit, ai să mori, dar ori așa mor. Și tot ce unul seala cât de mare, că așa un ce unul, țin minte, și alt pe chirostrel l-a pus în mijlocul o agrez, tot o mâncat. A decedat atunci bunica, mămica tatălui. Din cauza foametei? Foametei, da. A decedat Ilenuța, care aștepta 2 pâini și 2 colaci, și Iecubaș, micuțul, care era de acum, după mine, avea un an de zile, era sugaci și a murit în mari chinuri.
Pe sub drum cădeau oamenii, mureau și părintele cu carul îi ducea la cimitir.
Copilul de acum, când se trăgea de moarte, e clar că și mămica Bocea și eu și sora Eugenia și sora Pelagia, că de acum nu se îndeață. Și el nu putea să moară, știți, auzea plângete, bocet și îi curgea lăcrămioare pe obraz. Străgea de moarte, zicea lacrimile și aia curgeau. Și a venit vecina și zice, ieșiți afară să-i țin eu copilului lumânarea, că el nu poate să moară auzind bocet. Și noi am ieșit toți afară și copilul s-a stâns din viață în mare chinuri.
Fiindcă tata se mișca și avea putere, că totuși câte ceva mânca, îl chemau foarte des ca să facă groapa la ceilalți, rude, vecini, cunoscuți.
Un moș parfene din marginea satului i-a murit soția și nu aveau nici putere să-l ducă pe mort la groapă.
se ducea și săpa, o muncă enormă făcea acolo. Când dimineața se ducă mortul, de cum erau vreo 6 morți aruncați acolo în groapă. Și deci pe ceala cui i-o săpat groapa, era chiar la suprafață.
El a pus-o pe un covoraș, pe un lăicer și a târâit-o până la groapă. Acolo s-au grămădit vreo câțiva oameni împrejurul lui și el îi roagă pe oameni: ajutați-mi să o dă în groapă, cum o chema pe dânsa, ajutați-mi să o dă în groapă. Și vă rog frumos, eu zic tatăl nostru, intră acolo și dați țărnă peste noi.
Asta îmi povestea el, că mergând prin sat, de la primărie la margină, că noi trăim la margină, vedea 3-4 umflați pe marginea drumului și dădeau Duhul. Ceea ce el povestea îngrozea enorm, să aduci oamenii la așa ceva. Nu a fost niciodată, povestea tata, ca să fie secetă într-un an și oamenii să n-aibă rezerve. Tot timpul avea pe 2, pe 3 ani oamenii se temeau de foame, de secetă și aveau grijă. Săraci erau foarte puțini și dacă era vreo secetă și era vreo unul sărac, apoi toți ceilalți să știe că se dă de poman, dar cui? Ei, la cel mai sărac, nici acela nu îndura foame.
Like everywhere, immediately after the king's treason and the occupation of Romania, the Bolsheviks started eliminating the Romanian elite, beginning with the army. Of the 19,000 officers that the army had in 1944, only 700 were still in the army after a few years of persecutions. Everyone deemed a threat to the new Bolshevik order was eliminated, from army generals, to intellectuals, politicians and even wealthy peasants. Tens of thousands of Romanians would be imprisoned, tortured, assassinated, deported, or condemned to forced labor. Even before the traitor king left the country, the so-called People's Tribunal was formed and the persecution of the Romanian elite started. Buildings were confiscated, Eastern Front veterans killed and their families persecuted, villages were forcefully collectivized, anti-communists were tortured to death, priests were arrested and churches closed. The Russian language became compulsory in schools, the control of and systematic destruction of Romanian culture began, etc. This savage organized genocide of the Romanian nation continued until the Jews were slowly removed from power by Romanian communists such as Nicolae Ceausescu or by the USSR as a result of the 1956 Hungarian revolt, which had a predominantly anti-Jewish character since, like everywhere in Eastern Europe, the rulers of Hungary were Jewish. Thousands of Romanian patriots of both Romania and occupied Bessarabia formed resistance movements. They would retreat into the mountains where they fought the communists for decades until every one of them was either killed on the spot or imprisoned and tortured to death.
Se mai vede urmă de cal, pe la izvoare nu mai apare umbra călare a vreunui haiduc. Unde s-au dus când au apus ani de sus ai gloriilor? Unde-s pistoalele, unde-s pumnalele, cai și fintele haiducilor? Nai, 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 nai. La ai gloriei lor? Unde-s pistoalele, unde-s pumnalele, cai și flintele haiducilor? Unde s-au dus când au apus anii de sus ai gloriei lor? Unde-s pistoalele, unde-s pumnalele, cai și flintele haiducilor? Nai, 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 nai,
What 2,000 years of occupation, genocides and aggressive assimilation attempts from countless world empires and migratory hordes could not do, was managed by the Bolshevik Jews in just a few decades. To destroy the soul and the identity of the Romanian nation. The goal of Bolsheviks was to transform Romania in a mass of easy-to-manipulate workers, slaves to the Bolshevik leadership. To do this you have to eliminate the elements that would resist such a transformation, and you have to cut any connection that the remaining mass had with its past, and also destroy its unique culture. This is what the genocidal campaign of the post-war period tried to do in Romania, through fear and intimidation, physical elimination of the elite, the abandonment and denigration of the indigenous culture and the forced brainwashing into the Bolshevik one, etc. The destruction of moral values was also a critical part of a Judeo-Bolshevik program. In the case of peasants, which formed the majority, this was partly achieved by collectivization, which abolished private property and thus eliminated any incentives for honest hard work and sometimes forced the peasants to steal their own products in order to feed their families. The peasants that were too hard-working and thus were wealthier were hunted down and persecuted, sent to labor camps, imprisoned or killed. The entire folklore and ethnography that we have presented in Part 6 of this series was developed over thousands of years by simple peasants, up until World War II. The communists interrupted this unbroken chain however, and the peasants stopped caring for cultural activities in the face of so much persecution and hardships, and very few people, mostly experts, create such art today. Although the genocides, famines, assassinations, deportations and persecutions of Romanians by the Judeo-Bolsheviks left permanent scars in the Romanian society, the destruction of the Romanian identity through the destruction of its culture and ethnography is by far the worst damage caused by Bolshevism in Romania, and transformed the Romanian people into a herd of sheep easy to be manipulated, with little or no connection to its history and thus no patriotism, and with a discontinued ethnography and thus driven only by materialism.